So being prepared coming into the studio is really important to avoid ruining the session. Something as simple as the clothes that you wear, right? I typically end up wearing something athleisure because I'm expecting to sweat a little bit, but people can come in with noisy clothes.
Hi there, everybody. You just heard from Tyler Hyrchuk. Tyler is an amazing professional voice actor based in Toronto. So he goes into all the studios, all the big ones. And you know what? He's got tons of tips for you. Today, you're going to learn about what it means to go into an actual recording studio, how to behave there, the kinds of words that they say, the jargon, all of that kind of stuff. What to expect as a voice actor, what the expectations are of you as a voice actor in session. We're going to hear so many things that you probably didn't even realize that you didn't know about working in the professional studio. Hope you enjoy the show. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Tyler. It's so great to see you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So we're talking about studio stuff, going into professional studios, obviously not your home studio, but a studio outside of your home where there are engineers working and so on. Can you tell us, when was the first time you went into a professional recording studio to record a voiceover?
Sure. So my background is in radio broadcasting, so I had experience at school, and technically my first paid gig was doing a narration for a soccer association awards committee of some kind. But it wasn't exactly a proper studio. I went into this place and they had a camera set up with a lav mic and they filmed me with, I think, the camera, the lens cap on, and just used the audio that way. And I was so nervous, and that was 10 plus years ago, and to this day I have never listened back to it.
Oh my goodness.
But my first proper in-studio VO was for a high-energy toy commercial. And I wasn't really sure what to expect, but it was a lot of fun, and I was able to see them build the commercial while I was in there, which is really cool.
Wow. It's rare probably that a talent gets to watch, how everything is made, if you will, afterwards. So that would have been a really interesting studio experience. And obviously you've been in voiceover now for over 10 years and you've seen a lot of different things. And living in Toronto, you've seen a lot more than most of the voice talent will have seen because you're in a major center. Obviously it's not the capital of Canada, that's Ottawa, but a lot of times Toronto does feel that way. So But anyway, Toronto is where a lot of the activity happens in the Canadian voiceover market, for those who don't know. So over the past decade or so, how has studio work changed from your perspective?
Sure. So prior to the pandemic specifically, there were in-person auditions, in-person callbacks, things like that. Clients are in the studio with you, and that has kind of changed with the pandemic, where if I go into studio, like for example, I was in studio 2 weeks ago for something, and it was only myself and the engineer there. The voice director was on Zoom. One of the agency people was on Zoom. And I'll go more into that story later, but it was interesting because it's just you and the engineer, So that's one big thing that has changed. Makes me a little bit less nervous, I guess, lower stakes, because the people that need to make the decisions aren't behind the glass, talking about you, and then they turn off your headphones so they could be making these wild gestures, and you're thinking, oh no, and they're like, I didn't want milk in my coffee, and you're thinking that they're talking about you. So who knows?
I know, that's the danger of being on the other side of the glass when a decision maker is in the room. And yeah, that talk back button, that is like lifeblood. I mean, if they're pressing it, then you know what they're saying. But if they're not, well, you're just totally tuned into nothing. There's nothing coming through those cans. So thanks for sharing that. That's interesting. So, what are some of the expectations of a voice actor when they're in an in-studio session?
Sure. So expect to start making a good impression as you are approaching the building. There may be a receptionist there who will greet you, have you come into the studio, have you wait outside. You'll be typically physically introduced to people, the engineer, the voice director, any clients that are there. You expected to be, friendly, professional. Obviously, if you've built some rapport, you can be a little bit more friendly and kind of, hey, how's it going, Jeff? How's it going, Steve? But for the most part, I almost treat it like it's a job interview to some extent. Like, these are people that they have already hired you, but the dynamic in my eyes is kind of like that. So, you might be on camera. They might have you on a Zoom call. So don't be doing anything inappropriate because they could be filming you. Assume the mic is always hot as well. Don't apologize, although that would be for both in studio and at home. You're an instrument. They ask you to say the words. You say the words. They don't like it. They ask you to do it again. They can see you through the glass, typically. And as I was saying before, they'll likely turn your headphones off when they're discussing feedback, but sometimes they don't. So don't take anything personally.
Oh, wow. Yeah, sometimes they don't. What you just said there, I was like, oh, goodness. Well, I'm sure you've heard a few things through those that headset that you kind of didn't think you were supposed to. But, I guess we're all human and they're trying to work through a decision. Sometimes it's about what you're doing. Sometimes it's about the coffee and how bad it is. Like, it isn't necessarily about the performer. But that's interesting. Yeah, because before the pandemic, there really wasn't a lot of just kind of video used. You went in there, you did your thing, people were all there. But now people are collaborating from different parts of the world or different parts of the city because they just don't want to come in anymore or whatever. And then you're like, okay, well, this is strange. So you're saying don't pick your nose. Try not to twiddle your thumbs or go on your phone or something like that because it's going to look bad. And you'd want to make a good first impression. I really like what you said about, when you first walk into the building, like that's huge because, people are probably looking out the window to see if you're on time or not. Like, it could be someone watching you and you don't even realize that they can see you. Mind you, if it's like the 10th floor of a very tall building, maybe they're not doing that. But if it's like a really cool studio in one of the neighborhoods, it's in a house or something. I've been to a couple like that. They're going to probably be on the lookout for you, or at least the receptionist is through the little bay window in front. So at any rate, no, good tips. I appreciate that. So we've talked a little bit about what the voice actors' expectations are so far as like how, what it might be like and how they are to behave. Obviously, we all want to do a great job. We want to be invited back. We want to have all these good things happen. But, obviously, there are times in the studio that just go really bad. So what might ruin a recording session? And how should talent respond in those situations?
Sure. So being prepared is super important. Fortunately, I've never been in a situation yet, fingers crossed, where I've showed up and they're like, your mouth is too noisy. Figure that out. Or, you sound too nasal, whatever the case may be. So being prepared beforehand, whether you need to eat something and you find that your stomach is quiet after you eat something, not eating too much, avoiding things like dairy, spicy foods beforehand. I'll bring potentially on the way to the job, I'll have like a ginger candy or something in my mouth, green apples, things like that. So being prepared coming into the studio is really important to avoid ruining the session. Something as simple as the clothes that you wear, right? I typically end up wearing something athleisure because I'm expecting to sweat a little bit, but people can come in with noisy clothes. And then if you don't have a plan B, they're not going to ask you to, remove your shirt or anything, but so you need to be prepared and have quiet clothes. Athleisure is important. Behavior off mic. When you think no one's watching, they could be watching anyways. Client delays could also ruin recording sessions. And kind of tying into a personal anecdote, communication and jargon, because I think it was my second in-studio session. It was at a studio where the recording space was upstairs. And so I went in, I got there in plenty of time, did the session, and the voice director said, and I quote, "Great job, you can head downstairs." So I walked out of the booth, went down the stairs, went to the bathroom. As I was leaving the bathroom with my stuff, he was passing by and said, "Great job up there." And so thanks so much, went to my car, started driving home. About 15 minutes into my drive, I got a call from my agent who was like, "Hey, Tyler, where are you?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm on my way home." And he was like, "You were not released. You need to go back." So I, hard Yui, drove back to the studio, ran inside, and fortunately, the voice director, stopped me in the hallway and was like, "We were doing the French version. You're okay." Still to this day, I don't know if the clients know that I actually left. But I was able to, catch my breath and finish the session. And another small little tidbit in there, when I was leaving the studio the first time, I walked into somebody's office thinking that was the door to leave the building. So that was awkward too. But all in all, I was actually at that studio for the first time in like 3 or 4 years the other week. And it's a fun story that people seem to know about.
Oh, well, there's so many doors and places, and you're just trying to find the way out. Like, nothing bad about that, especially if the doors aren't marked or, it doesn't seem obvious. So that, oh my gosh, that is hilarious. So to go downstairs actually meant go wait until we call you back into the room?
Right. I didn't hear you're wrapped, you're released, you can go home. I didn't hear any of those things. I just heard great job, head downstairs.
Right. And that does almost sound final. Like if I were to hear that, I'd be like, okay, I guess my work is done. Like they didn't say go downstairs, have a snack, we'll come get you. Mm-hmm. So kind of on their end too,
And the receptionist never stopped me when I was leaving the building either. So.
Oh, wow.
I wasn't even like, okay, I'm going to go. And they didn't have me sign anything. So, or they didn't need me to that session. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So is there, now that you've brought this up, is there kind of like a phrase or words that people will say to let you know you're done? Because you said, oh, we're wrapped or whatever. Like, are there kind of some jargon lingo that we should be aware of in the studio so that we don't, look like we don't know what we're talking about?
Yes. So released, you're wrapped. Potentially great job, you can head downstairs, but not in my
Depending.
case. But in studio now, when people start jumping off the Zoom, that can be an indication potentially that they're gonna wrap you up and finish you. But at the same time, I was in a session 2 weeks ago at that same studio where I had my terrible incident, and I was slated in for a 3-hour session. It was 2 30-second OLVs, online videos, and it ended up being over 6 hours. And the reason it was over 6 hours is because it was myself, the engineer, the voice director, and an accounts person that were all working on it for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Then about, I want to say maybe 5 or 6 agency people and 2 or 3 clients jumped on the Zoom. So they turned my headphones off. They were talking. Then they left. Voice director comes back on the Zoom, says, hey, Tyler, so we need to start from scratch. And that was just, a communication error. Basically, they were wanting something that the voice director didn't realize. So I had done everything in my power to get where he thought we should be. Mm-hmm. And then the clients came on and they were like, no, it needs to be different. And then, and so we had
awful.
Like 45 minutes to an hour to do it again. They came back on and then they were saying, awesome, we're all happy, but we need to wait on approval from one more person. So who was not on the call and is higher up in the, higher up in the pecking order. So I had to wait 45 minutes for that person for approval. And then they came back and said, we need to add a the in this line. Did some does, waited 20 more minutes, then I was good to go. So it's important understanding the approval process. Just because you see people on a call or in the room does not mean that they are the people who are making the final decision. Other stuff in the actual recording process, 3 wild, 3 in a row, ABC, or 3 on a stick, I've all heard those. Basically means giving 3 takes of one line, just kind of up in the air. So up in the air is another thing that I've heard too. It's not necessarily you're being led into it. It's just they'll start recording and you just provide those 3 takes outside of the script.
Wow. And I would assume that those 3 takes are slightly different, each one, because they're asking you for 3. So like a series of 3 could mean like give me one this way, that way, and a completely opposite way, not do it 3 times the same way.
Right. And some people will make that mistake and think that they're trying to match it as close as possible. But I would say 99 times out of 100, when you're doing 3 wild or 3 ABCs, you need to do, or rather, an ABC. 3 ABCs would technically be 9 takes. But make it different because that's what they're looking for is variety, right? So the trap that people fall into is they'll do an A take and then they'll go as far away as possible and do a B take and then forget they just did the A take and then the C will be similar to an A. So sometimes it's recency bias with the client. They'll be like, we like C the most, but that's just the most recent one that they heard. But variety in your ABCs is important.
Oh my goodness. Like this whole time we've been talking, I've been so concerned for the Tyler of that session ago. Like, did they feed you? Like 6
No.
hours. I mean, so should you have brought a picnic lunch? Like, what's the deal here? Like, what do you do?
So that's just it. And it's important to be prepared for longer sessions. I did another session a couple months ago where I thought it was going to be 2 or 3 hours. And I had a second session in the afternoon back at home, but I didn't realize how long it was going to take. And that comes into providing a hard out if you need to. A hard out being, I need to finish this session at this time. That's as long as you have me. Right? And so what ended up happening was it was a 10 o'clock start. My other session was at, I think, 2 o'clock. And we're approaching 1, and I'm thinking, well, we need to be done. Right? So I mentioned to the engineer just casually, hey, I have to get out of here in, 15, 20 minutes. And he was like, oh, okay. And then my agent texted me saying, do you have a hard out? And I was like, kind of. So I managed to move my next session back an hour, and they still weren't done by then. But they had me just record a bunch of options. And then I said, if you really need me to come back, I can. I ran home. That session was maybe 8 minutes long. And then I texted the studio saying, I can come back if you need me to. And they ended up technically wrapping me about 6 hours after the start time again. So communicating your hard outs is so important. And in some aspects, you will get overtime pay if you're kept there for over a certain length of time.
Right.
But
oh my gosh, that is wild. So I wonder how offensive it would be if you were to order skip the dishes or Uber Eats or something in the middle of a session, because it's like, well, you're there. They're not going to feed you. Like, I mean, you got to do something. So either you're packing some snacks. I've heard this said that you should always have like an emergency snack or some sort of a small meal with you if you're going out, especially if you have like dietary restrictions. And let's say they have catering at the studio, but you can't eat anything that's there. You know, that would be a real bummer too. So, yeah.
Being
oh my
prepared
gosh.
for that. Bringing food, also food that won't upset your stomach or give you additional mouth noises is important. Mm-hmm. But some of the other jargon that I kind of have run into, a booking versus a hold versus a callback versus a short list. So that's not necessarily in studio so much as beforehand. But, a booking, you have the job. A hold, they're looking for a specific time of a day that you might be available. A callback just meaning that they want you to audition again and they've kind of culled down to a few people. And then a short list being you just have to hope that they pick you, your top 5, top 10. And then a couple more in terms of in studio, punching you in. So an engineer will say, hey, I'm going to punch you in for this next line. What that typically means is they're going to play some audio that you've already recorded, or maybe there's what's called a scratch track. So the engineer or somebody else has already laid down the VO beforehand, and you're, repeating it, obviously doing a better job, because if they were doing a great job, they would have gotten paid for it. But to match the cadence and tempo and things. And so punching you in, they'll play that first line for you, and as soon as that first line's done, they're armed and record, and you say the next line.
Right. So I'm just thinking about where I've heard of this kind of concept before, and maybe slightly different, but when you have someone who either can't read or can't see, maybe a small child or someone with macular degeneration, like Dame Judi Dench, for instance, you'll have someone read a line to that person and then they repeat it back, but as you say, better, because you're the actor, you're being paid to do it. But would that be similar? Like, you're punching in, is just basically a line read? Is that kind of what you'd say?
Yeah. And the line read could be that scratch track that they're again playing for you. So they could potentially just say, hey, I'm going to do the line read, copy me. But that's also kind of frowned upon in a lot of circles. I personally don't mind a line read because if I'm not doing it, you giving me a line read will make me do it faster. But some people take huge offense to being given a line read.
Yeah, I totally appreciate all of the jargon that you have just broken down for us. And so many people will now go into a studio environment feeling much more prepared because they'll know the language or at least a little bit more. So, when you go into professional studio, there's at least a few other people that are working on the project. You've mentioned a handful of them here. In your usual sessions, I guess this is now usual post-pandemic, post-COVID, how many people are usually there that you interact with? And do you interact with them based on their roles or do you get to see everybody?
Mm-hmm. So, depending on the size of the studio, a receptionist will greet you or an admin person at the front. And they may not even know who you are. So you have to say, hey, I'm Tyler. I'm here for 10 o'clock, Chevrolet. And then they'll, oh, awesome. Thanks so much. Just take a seat outside. You'll likely be introduced to the engineer first. As you get put into the booth, they'll come in, they'll adjust your mic stand, they'll adjust your mic, tell you how to control your headphone settings, things like that. And technically, those are the only people that will 100% of the time be in the studio, the engineer. You get a voice director sometimes in there with the engineer. They may be zooming in. And again, clients, agency people, a producer of some kind. And the producer will be the one who probably kind of parses the client's thoughts. And then the voice director will be the person who's giving you the actual feedback. So you can hear them chattering on and making decisions, and then the voice director will take a second and be like, okay, great. For this next take, I need you to sound like a truck. And then you have to kind of take that. And what's important, kind of getting a bit off from the question, but what's important in a session like that to understand the feedback is to ask questions, right? So if the voice director says, hey, Stephanie, can you sound more like a truck? What does that mean to you?
Exactly. What it means pretty, I don't know, big, loud, like, a truck.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. So having all those people in there can be kind of daunting. The only people you really need to worry about are the engineer and the voice director. And the engineer will be the one who more often than not says, okay, great, we're recording, here's take 2. And there's still some times where I'm waiting and the voice director will say, great, let's get 3 for you. Or let's get 3 in a row, and I'll wait, and I'll have to say, are you recording? Because some engineers aren't vocal, right? So I always try to wait because I can do a phenomenal take, and the engineer stops me midway saying, oh, I wasn't recording. I wasn't armed. So that's, yeah.
That's so sad. Yeah. Like, well, yeah, because I guess I've spoken in a recording school for a number of years, just trying to help those engineers to bridge the technical and creative gap with how do you work with a voice actor? Like, what do you do and what do you not do? And how important is communication, eye contact, using the talkback button, making them feel like that they're doing a great job and being positive, all these things. And it's just really, like, sometimes you'll just get someone who's socially unaware and doesn't give you any cues of any kind or whatnot. But you know what? There are so many good engineers out there who are aware and sensitive to the artist, and they bend over backwards to do a great job and to make you sound really good. So
100%.
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out. So you almost have to develop some kind of a rapport with that engineer and know what their cues are. And the more you work with them, the more you're called back. I assume the easier it is.
Yeah, and I have worked in situations where I've been with a client for a couple years, but there have been new engineers over the course of however long we've been together, to the point where I'm super comfortable with the client, how they work, and the engineer isn't as familiar. And there was a situation last year where we were waiting for approval, and the engineer, younger guy, nice guy, told a story about how over the weekend he got food poisoning. And I'm like, the client's on the call. And on top of that, it's a very, it's supposed to be a professional setting. And right. He's talking like he's talking to hese bros. And these are all women from the clients and the agency. And they're kind of laughing, but it's kind of a polite laugh. Yeah. And then after the session, I was like, you flew too close to the sun there. I would. Oh, and then he went, yes. Yeah, I guess you're right. I probably should. Yeah. No, you should not have done that.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, well, it's a live and learn sort of thing. And maturity is important, in professionalism, all of that. So now that we've covered kind of some oddball situations in the studio as well, what would you say is the biggest difference between recording in a professional space and working in your own space?
Mm-hmm. The biggest thing that I personally love, and I always try to get into a studio if I can, that's the beauty of living in a big hub like Toronto. I can get to a studio if they give me the option. Potentially, they'll be more inclined to hire you if you can come into studio. But the biggest thing on my end is that I'm not responsible for the tech, right? I'm not responsible for my neighbors putting on laundry. I'm not responsible for the fire alarm going off, which it has gone off in sessions before. And another thing, kind of going back to that first gig where they were showing me the commercial as it was being built, you can see the visuals way easier because they have a monitor usually in studio. And so I'll hear on the Zoom the clients being like, oh, there's a lag. It doesn't line up for me. They'll have to send off a link and then the clients will be, oh, great, it does fit. But if I'm in the same space as the engineer, I can see that live. And it's going to be potentially a shorter session because there is less lag and it's easier for me to match up, vocals with visuals.
Mm-hmm. No, very, very well put. I think there's also something really lovely aside from not having the responsibilities of all those hats to wear when you are at home working as engineer, director, this, that, the other. But I think it's just being in person, seeing people, developing relationships, getting fresh air. I mean, there's so many great benefits that come from being able to go out and you have community in that way too. So I love that. And as we get to the end of our time together, we've already covered a lot about what a talent could expect going in. And I think anyone who's new and hasn't yet been in a studio, yet been invited, they have a pretty good idea of how to behave, I'd say. So if you could sum up a great studio experience in just 3 words, what would they be?
Communication, efficiency, and probably satisfaction. As in, the more communication there is, the faster the job will happen and the happier the clients will be. Oh, we slated in 3 hours, but it was done in 1.5.
Bonus. Those are good sessions because you still get paid, for all the work you're doing, and then you get some time off to do something else, get ready for the next gig. So, my goodness. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Tyler. It's so great to speak with you and to see you. I know we had a good time in Toronto, the group of us that went out for dinner that night, and just so happy that this podcast came to be. So, for others who don't know you yet, what's the best way for them to learn more about you, and where can they find you?
Sure. So they can find me on my website, tylerhyrchuk.ca, tylerhyrchuk.ca. I'm Tyler Hyrchuk VO on Instagram and Twitter. And you can also check out the Indiegogo campaign for Peculiar Radio, which is a show that I co-produced, co-wrote, feature in, and did some sound design for. But I'm super open to, sharing thoughts, giving advice, things like that. And for those who are dedicated to learn, please feel free to reach out to me. If you reach out, I give you some feedback, and I never hear from you again, you'll probably never hear from me again. So just be nice, be polite, it goes both ways.
All right. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for joining.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And that's the way we saw the world through the lens of voiceover this week. Thank you for listening to Vox Talk. We had such a great time in studio here with Tyler Hyrchuk. So if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with your friends. Give it to anybody you think might be interested in finding out what working in a professional recording studio environment is like, because it is very different from working at home. And you know what? We just have so much fun making this show. If you have any ideas, send them to us. You can reach me at stephanie@voices.com. So for Voices, I'm Stephanie Cicerelli. Vox Talk is produced by Jeff Bremner. And of course, we'll see you next week.